Hello again. This is Dr. Carol Francis. This is course number 4, Managing Relationships After Abuse and Trauma Have Been Escaped and as you've moved into recovery. This particular class is about relearning how to be a team player on a healthy team. Now, depending on the nature of the experiences you had while you were in your abuse or being traumatized, you may have actually been a team player in the process of surviving and escaping the situation that you found yourself in. And that type of team often develops such a strong camaraderie, such a sense of connection, such a sense of everybody having each other's backs. This happens in situations where there's been a school shooting, or there's been a shooting in some sort of mall, or there's been some sort of a major natural disaster or a war situation where people are helping each other survive, or soldiers that have come back and they have had each other's back in a situation and they work together. There's not always all that easy collaborative experience under those circumstances, however. And so that's why for some people, coming out of an abusive and traumatic situation requires them to learn yet again how to be a team player. They have to remember what it takes to feel and to function like they are a team player, and also to be an individual, an instrument within the relationship that enables people to function as a healthy team. Because remember, when you come back into a situation, you've entered into a team that may or may not be functional around your need to recover. They may have been completely traumatized by your trauma too, but in very different ways than you. And they also may not have a lot of cohesiveness in their ability to kind of hang together around what you need. They may not know how to function as a team either. You may come back to a family that's very discordant or not very healthy, but at least they don't abuse you. You may come back to a situation where you feel completely like a stranger and you don't feel like you're part of that team at all because your experiences have made you feel so completely different from everybody else in the team that you've rejoined. So for you to remember, how do I become a team player, and how do I help this team that's relatively healthy compared to the situation that I just survived, I just escaped? How do I become a team player here? And these are guidelines to help you kind of think this through. Who do I need to be? What do I need to say? What do I need to feel? I think one thing that we want to discover first is, in the process of trying to create a team or respond to a healthy team, let's say you go back to a work situation that's relatively healthy, and you say, okay, well, I've got to learn how to be a team player again. And one of the first things you have to realize is that you can't get stuck in your own personal issues. That includes the issues of your recovery. That's very hard. This is a very high and mighty request, that you step into this new situation and look at it as if it has nothing to do with what you have just escaped or what you have endured for a long time. That this is a brand new environment, totally different, and anything that looks the same as what you might have gone through in the traumatic situation isn't necessarily so, because of all these personal issues that you bring to the moment. There's a phenomenon called projective identification, where people feel something inside and then they place it like a projection instrument, like a movie projector. And they place it onto the environment, and they think that the environment, the people outside them, are actually reenacting this internal experience. And it's a complicated one to kind of work through, and that's why I always recommend being in therapy, so that you can test these things and rework your perceptions. The second thing related to it comes from a book called The 4 Agreements, which I highly, highly recommend. And in The 4 Agreements, the author talks about one aspect of do not take things personally. And this is a tough one, because in a situation where you're very highly, highly damaged or injured or emotionally distressed, everything feels very personal, because your emotional skin is not very thick. everything has an impact on you. Everything potentially has a trigger. Everything is hard to navigate given all that you're in the process of coping with on the inside of you. But if you can just remind yourself that what's going on in this new environment that's relatively healthy is nothing to do with you personally, but everything to do with each of the individuals and how they are all trying to coordinate themselves. And now they're going to try to coordinate themselves with you as well. And to consider, okay, I'm not going to take this personally. It's not about me. It's this situation. How do I step into it? A third thing to realize is that if you're feeling a sense of impatience, it may mean that you're feeling very anxious, that you're feeling very angry, or that you have a physical need, like low blood sugar, for example. And that makes you aware that you're taking much more attention to your own feelings and your own timing of what you think should be occurring, as opposed to realizing that in a group situation, there's so many people, all of whom have their own timing, all of whom have their own feelings, all of them have their own opinions, their own perspectives, and their own needs, and that also includes you. So that the situation isn't all about what you're needing and feeling. And while you're in the midst of recovering, you may go through kind of this self-centeredness because you are trying to recover. And this type of self-centeredness of recovery can make you sometimes feel very impatient about the needs and the wants and the feelings and the opinions of other people. They may just seem so irrelevant to you or unimportant or inessential. And so the sense of impatience or intolerance may erupt inside of you, and you have to kind of say, well, this situation isn't only about me. It's not only about my feelings, my timing, my needs, my past. It is about each person's in this room, this office, this building, this family, this project, and I'm only one in the equation. Also, don't put too much burden of too many issues into one moment. Just one thing at a time. Manage one thing at a time. See if the group can manage one thing at a time. You might be able to discern 10 issues and want to just rattle off all 10 issues that need to be taken care of. But just take care of one moment, one issue at a time, and kind of slow yourself down in terms of prioritizing that. The fifth one is very pertinent to individuals who have survived abusive situations and traumatic events where someone else was taking charge of the circumstance, is that you have experienced the ultimate experience of being powerless. And in your efforts to recover, regaining your sense of power, your sense of capacity to influence something, your sense of ability to state an opinion and not be punished for it, or to go in a certain direction and not be discouraged, or to be able to take action on something and not be criticized or slapped down. You must kind of regroup and say, what? I have power in this situation. I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know how to express it. I know that I have power here. I don't know what it is. I don't know to what degree. But it's an important question for you to ask yourself as you slip back into being part of a healthy team. The converse is also true. You may be so determined to never let anybody dominate you ever again. No one's ever going to take charge of you. No one's ever going to take your power away. That you may be going the other extreme of just seeing everybody as if they're all threats of trying to overpower you. Or they're all threats of trying to squash you or shrink you. That they're all your abuser. And so you react to that by just like this sense of, and you might just blast over them, realizing that, maybe these people are very awkward in expressing their opinions and their wants and their needs. And maybe some of them do get belligerent or over voluminous in the way they talk about it, maybe too loud, maybe too adamant. But are they actually being abusive? And there's that question you have to ask yourself. And you also have to ask yourself, in your efforts to never be disempowered again, are you exerting so much dominant power that you're not having any courtesy toward everybody else? Important question to ask yourself. Also notice when you're feeling very stubborn or anxious about change and you find yourself resisting the change of a situation just because you feel anxious about it or you feel very stubborn about it, because groups change and things change, and there's always kind of a movement taking place. And change can really stir an insecurity. It can really trigger a sense of not knowing what the future holds, and that feeling of being out of control is activated. It's very frightening. But the situation may not be frightening, just your internal reaction is. And then finally, in terms of dealing with conflicts within a group, you want to learn how to communicate your ideas clearly without yelling and also without shrinking. And so to practice the way you're going to bring up an issue is very important, just to practice it in front of the mirror, to say it to yourself over and over in the car, to practice it. I really recommend that people rehearse their lines when they know that to bring up a subject matter is going to feel awkward. And it's very important to rehearse it out loud, because when you rehearse it out loud, you get accustomed to hearing yourself speak your truth. You can re-script it if you feel like you're coming across too harshly, too cryptically, too much like a shrinking violet, or too bold, or too condescending or judgmental, and you can restructure it, you can re-script it. And it's very much like what an actor does. How do I say this line? But like a writer would do, how do I compose this line? And you want to combine those together. And you can imagine talking to the individual in your head. However, I want to caution you that while you're imagining talking to the individual in your head, realize the individual you're in your head may be more severe than the individual that actually exists. Because when you have recovered from abuse or trauma, you tend to believe on some level that other people are going to be more antagonistic to you than they actually ever wish to be. So just be aware of the image of this other person you create in your head as you practice the scripts of what you want to be saying. And try to imagine this person actually isn't as antagonistic, judgmental, critical as you might perceive them to be. Or if you think they really authentically are that judgmental and critical, how can you say what you need to say in a way that influences them is an incredibly important series of exercise and thoughts. And most people get anxious and don't try to think about how to say it. They just get anxious and stop trying to contemplate the variations of communications, the ways of saying it that they might be able to create. So make sure to stay in a very creative mode. Okay, now, when you are a team player, when you're part of a team, I just want to kind of wake up and help you remember what a team looks like. People who are playing on a team with a team consciousness share mutual involvement in the events or the situation, the goals or the solutions. They also, number two, they authentically are interested in what is taking place. So they all kind of share the moment. Third, they're open to different ideas and opinions, different points of view, and different needs of the people. And in this ideal group that I'm describing, they're team players, and as a consequence, they play respectfully toward one another, and they also have respect for themselves. So there's this mutual balance between others and self, others and self, others and self. Both others exist and you yourself exist. And finally, when there are problems, the idea is for you to be a creative, positive, solution-oriented individual. To think of the many alternatives that might be able to address the circumstances. Now, they may not be willing to take you up on all of your suggestions, but at least you're keeping yourself in the mobile, proactive position of trying to be a creative problem solver. Now, there are those of you that have experienced abuse and trauma who you escaped specifically because, and let me add, you survived specifically because you were actually able to influence the other individual in very manipulative ways, sounding positive or figuring out what messages they needed to hear that enabled you to escape. So consider that you've already manifested this ability to play on a complicated team, and now you're going to be on a team that isn't going to abuse you, and now you can still know that those talents inside of you exist and have been tested quite rigorously. So let's just look at this again. Relationships that are collaborative with your spouse, with your children, with your parents, with your siblings, with your coworkers, with your boss, with your employees, with any sort of projects that you're working on in your community, or with friends or sports teams. They're mutually able to ask for help, and they're mutually able to give each other help. They have empathy for each other's pains and concerns and worries, and yet they don't necessarily take them all on as if they're going to be the one responsible for fixing each other's complications. There's a level of honesty. That doesn't mean everything they're thinking is being said. It just means that what is honest is being said in a way that can be shared respectfully, and that whatever they decide to share in an honest way seems to be for the betterment of most of the members of the group. So there's an honesty that's measured. They're able to share common interests and able to shift behaviors that are hurtful to another person. And the reason I'm bringing these last two up is that if you're partnering with a spouse or with children, you may not share all the interests, and you may not share all of the ideas with them that are going on in your head, but you're always maneuvering what ideas in your head are beneficial to the group, the greater group, and what ideas or experiences or suggestions seem to rally the common interests of everybody. And next, if you need to shift some behaviors that are offensive or hurtful to others, it's not that you're shifting the core of who you are, but you're shifting an outward manifestation. So if someone asks you to stop doing something because it's offensive to them, if it's not really essential to your core expression of respecting yourself, then you try to figure out a way to work around that so that that doesn't trigger them off. And a person who's in your court, you can also ask mutually if they can alter that manifestation. That doesn't mean they're altering their personality. Of course, that's tricky, right? Because you don't want to step on people's rights to be themselves. Okay, and this is the last thing I wanted to mention about what it's like to be on a mutual team when there's disagreements or there are concerns, because it's when these conflicts come in here. So here you are, imagine yourself in the middle of an ordinary, healthy conflict. Not an abuse, not a trauma, just people seeing things differently, people wanting things to be different, people having opinions on how things need to be different. So you are wanting to have respect for your point of view and express that using I statements as opposed to judgmental statements. Oh, that's so stupid, or I don't know how you could think that way, is definitely off limits, right? Those are provocative, blaming, condescending statements. But instead, well, I see it this way because, or I feel this way about this because. And the because has to be because of you, something inside of you. Not to blame yourself, but because you're just sharing your perspective on things. As opposed to, I feel this way because you're doing, that is not an I statement. People often will use I statements and then get away with the blaming on the second half of the sentence. So you want to make sure that you're using an I statement. Now, will the other person always be so conscientious about their I statements? Not necessarily. You can ask, would you please talk about this in terms of how you feel? I want to know how you feel and what your perspectives are, but I actually don't want you to be sitting here putting me down or blaming me because I also respect myself. Interesting sentence, right? I do want to hear about what you're saying. I do want to hear about how you feel, but I do not want to hear you blaming me or finding fault with me because I may just perceive it differently and I want you to respect me. However, no, this is a very long sentence, right? No, I'm willing to consider changing things that optimize our connection right now. I'm willing to change things in order to make everybody feel as comfortable as possible. But I don't want to be blamed as doing something bad necessarily, unless, of course, you actually are. I mean, the other aspect of all this sentence is that those of you that have suffered from abuse, an abusive individual, a con artist, a gaslighter, a catfisher, a narcissist, physically abusive, emotionally abusive, sexually abusive, manipulative individual, or any of those, because that's a lot of categories, right? A bully that's belligerent and threatening and demeaning, well, they are to blame for their abusiveness towards you. There's no question. So that's a totally different relationship. And that's what I'm trying to make a big distinction here between when you enter out of those horrible situations where they are impossible dynamics for you to, you're not going to feel respected, and you're not going to get what you need, and you're not going to be able to express yourself and gain self-respect in those situations. The other individual is merely not capable of respecting you, and that's why you have to escape. You can't transform them. But in these new situations where this other person actually is capable of respecting you, but is having a moment of disrespect, it's not that they're being abusive, but they're having a moment of disrespect, frustration, criticism, and blame, then what you want to be able to do is just kind of call them out on this. Hey, listen, I really want to listen to what you want to say to me, but I want to hear it from your perspective, how you feel and why you're experiencing this right now, as opposed to you expressing it as if I'm all in the wrong or I'm to blame. I'm willing to work with you here to solve this situation, but I need to hear about you and your experience, not about how I'm causing all these horrible things to occur, because I don't think I'm causing horrible things. I think you are having a horrible moment, and I'd like to, because I care about you, give you a better moment. That also is a sentence that helps you not be manipulated, because you remember in those type of sentences that you matter. You're not going to shrink. You're not going to be condescended. You're not going to just acquiesce with another person. Another thing about really good team playing under conflict or under disagreements is that everybody maintains good eye contact. Everybody is relaxed relatively on their body, and they're moving their bodies with smooth movements. They're not jerking or dominating or pounding or showing aggressive gesticulations. They are there to talk about a complication and a disagreement, but they're not there to create a sense of threat or dominance in that regard. So that type of gesture on your part, the body language of you is, I'm going to look you in the eye comfortably, I'm going to keep my body relaxed, I'm going to move smoothly so that no one perceives me as being threatening. I'm going to listen to what their reactions are, what their opinions are, and I'm also going to voice my own personal opinions, not as facts, not as arguments, but as perspective. A perspective that you want to hold to because you respect yourself. To create more conflict or to enhance criticisms. There's always a better way to connect with someone than to create conflict and to create criticism. And if you're in the midst of creating an argument or feeling irritated or feeling like you want to oppose or disagree in some sort of emotional fashion, then you're not just stating your opinion. You're actually verbally trying to conquer them or hurt them or dominate them. And those things are, while they're not abuse, they're more akin to that emotion of antagonism than they are to connection. And you have to walk away from a conversation where conflict and disagreement and criticism have been the predominant form of communication. Say to yourself, why am I so competitive with that person? Or why do I want to harm that person? Or why do I want to just make them feel wrong? What is going on in this relationship that instead of maintaining connection, I'm actually trying to destroy the connection and hurt the person and yourself in the process? So those are some guidelines, and just thinking about the two-way conversations you're going to have with people as you are relearning the art of having two-way conversations and recovering through those conversations as well. Okay, take care and do enjoy the meditations, the guided imageries, and the exercises after you have written the knowledge gain questions and the self-reflection statements. And join me again for tomorrow or on the next class as we further explore what it means to be managing people in our lives, managing relationships in our lives when we are in the midst of recovering from abuse and trauma. Take care.